This story now enters the beginning of Ayanokoji's second year, when the school system starts to change, and a new special exam is immediately announced. The main conflict focuses on cooperation with the first-year students, the emergence of a threat from Class 1D, and several important meetings with new characters such as Hosen, Nanase, Yagami, and Ichika, which immediately make the situation even more complicated. A little disclaimer, this storyline may have several differences and adjustments from the original novel or anime version. So, if there are some storylines, characters, or settings that I intentionally remove or summarize to speed up the discussion toward Year 3, please understand. Alright, without further ado, let us continue to Part 1. The story begins in a closed room, where Tsukishiro is speaking to a child through a projector screen. That child is a new student candidate who will enter the elite school. However, his arrival is not as an ordinary student. Tsukishiro gives him an important mission: to memorize all the data of the second-year students, including Ayanokoji. Not only that, the child is also ordered to get Ayanokoji expelled from the school and then bring him back to their place of origin, the White Room. However, there is one rule that must not be broken. The existence of the White Room must remain a secret. If information about that place is leaked, the government might step in and conduct an investigation. Because of that, every action must be carried out carefully and secretly. To support this mission, Tsukishiro even promises special assistance to the child. Seeing the child's irritated expression, Tsukishiro is not surprised at all. He understands the reason very well. All this time, Ayanokoji has always been considered the best product of the White Room. That title has become a huge burden for the other students, as if all of them are forced to chase a standard that is almost impossible to reach. Tsukishiro then deliberately provokes the child's emotions by praising Ayanokoji excessively. He knows that anyone would eventually get sick of constantly being compared to someone else, especially the children of the White Room, who have lived under Ayanokoji's shadow all this time. In the end, Tsukishiro says that he has already prepared a stage, a suitable battlefield where the child can face Ayanokoji directly. Even so, Tsukishiro is still suspicious. He feels that the child is hiding something from him. However, for now, their conversation comes to an end. After that, the story shifts to Ayanokoji's life in his second year. The first day of class begins with instructions on the digital board. The students are told to sit in the same seats as the previous year. Not long after that, Miyake greets Ayanokoji and reminds him that lately, he has rarely joined group activities. Ayanokoji only nods quietly, silently accepting that advice. A few moments later, Horikita enters with a new appearance. Her hair has now been cut short. That change immediately shocks all the students, especially Sudo and Kushida. Kushida even briefly assumes that Horikita might be heartbroken. However, Horikita immediately denies it. She says that she cut her hair because of her new determination, which is to lead their class toward Class A. Hearing that, Kushida responds casually and says that she will grow her hair longer instead. At first glance, that comment sounds normal. However, to Ayanokoji, Kushida's words feel like they have another meaning. He realizes that Kushida truly does not like having the same appearance as someone she deeply hates. On the other hand, this elite school is also starting to change. Technology is now much more dominant. Printed books are slowly being replaced by tablets, and the school system is gradually becoming more digital. Ayanokoji even uses his points to change his seat. Now, he sits near the corridor, so it is easier for him to observe anyone who enters and leaves the classroom. Not long after that, Chapashira enters and announces something important. The students are asked to install an application called Overall Abilities. This application contains complete data about each student's abilities. The data will continue to be updated after every exam, and it covers all students from Year 1 to Year 3. Chapashira explains that this system was designed by Nagumo. Its purpose is to create a school that evaluates students based on individual ability. With this system, each student's abilities will be shown transparently. So, if a student does not show any ability, their score will appear low, and that can clearly become a huge disadvantage. For those who still remember Volume 10, Yamauchi was expelled because his score was too low. Now, through this system, the students will no longer be confused about deciding who should be sacrificed if a situation like that happens again. They only need to see who has the lowest score. Because of that, every student must continue improving their abilities. If not, they could become the next victim. As a closing announcement, Chapashira says that there will be a special exam in the near future. That announcement immediately shocks the students. After all, even on the first day of school, they already have to prepare for a new challenge. Chapashira then explains that this exam consists of two parts, a written exam and a communication exam. However, there is one detail that changes the atmosphere in the classroom. This time, they will not be paired with their classmates as usual, but with first-year students. Of course, many students immediately protest. They are confused about how junior students could possibly be involved in a senior-level exam. However, Chapashira explains it calmly. According to her, in the real world, seniority is not everything. In the working world, people with ability are the ones who will stand out, regardless of whether they are juniors or seniors. Because of that, this exam is designed to reflect that reality. In short, the format of this exam is actually similar to the previous one. The difference is that their partners this time will come from a different school year. This is where the overall abilities application will become very useful. The students can check the ability data of other students, then choose the most suitable partner based on the available information. However, to Ayanokoji, this exam feels suspicious. He immediately suspects that the exam is most likely Tsukishiro's design. If that is true, then this exam could be a trap. Ayanokoji has to be extremely careful, because if he ends up being paired with a student from the White Room, the situation could become dangerous. The problem is, even if Ayanokoji gets a perfect score, he could still be dragged down if his partner intentionally gets a score of 0. Because of that, the first step he has to take is to make sure that he is not paired with anyone from the White Room. When break time arrives, the classroom atmosphere immediately becomes chaotic. Many students look panicked and gather around Hirata. Together with Horikita, Hirata tries to calm everyone down. Both of them are determined to find a way so that not a single student from Class 2D has to be expelled. They then begin forming a strategy to gather information about the abilities of the first-year students. That information can be obtained through club activities, school events, or any other possible method. After the break ends, Horikita calls Ayanokoji to the corridor. There, she explains that the academic abilities of the second-year students are actually not that different from one another. Even so, there are still several students who stand out, and there are also those who are ranked near the bottom. Because of that, Horikita plans to help the students with low scores so they can find the most suitable partners. She also wants Ayanokoji to contribute to that plan. In that conversation, Horikita also briefly mentioned the personal competition between herself and Ayanokoji, although it had not been explained in detail yet. Not long after that, all the students received a message from Ichinose. She invited all first-year and second-year students to attend a meeting at 4 in the afternoon. That evening, the students began gathering in the gymnasium to attend the meeting arranged by Ichinose. Unfortunately, not all students came. Several students from both the first year and the second year chose to be absent. As usual, Ichinose opened the meeting in a friendly and cheerful manner. Her goal was clear: to build trust between the seniors and juniors. She truly had an extraordinary ability to lighten the mood and build social relationships. Seeing the way Ichinose led the meeting, Horikita came up with a new idea. She came with Sudo and Ayanokoji, then announced that she planned to directly visit the first-year students who did not attend. According to Horikita, the students who came were most likely those who felt worried about their own academic abilities. That meant the students who did not come might actually have high scores, and those were the students she wanted to target. Horikita wanted to make sure that the outstanding first-year students could be paired with the second-year students who truly needed help. However, there was one thing that felt strange. Not a single student from Class 1D attended the meeting. This was clearly not a coincidence. From that, Horikita concluded that someone must have been leading and directing them together. After the meeting ended, Horikita, Sudo, and Ayanokoji immediately headed to Class 1D. However, before they arrived there, they met Hashimoto outside the room. Hashimoto admitted that he was actually not interested in Ichinose's strategy. According to him, Sakayanagi had predicted from the beginning that the students who came to the meeting were most likely those who lacked confidence in their own abilities. So, Hashimoto only came to confirm whether that prediction was true or not. After saying that, he simply left. When Horikita, Sudo, and Ayanokoji finally arrived in front of Class 1D, they were suddenly greeted by Ryuu-en, who appeared from behind the door. He smiled casually, as if he had been waiting for them from the start. As usual, Ryuu-en immediately threw out a provocation. Sudo almost took the bait, but Horikita quickly calmed the situation before the atmosphere became even more heated. Ryuu-en then said that the new students seemed to already understand how this elite school worked. Because of that, even though they were facing a special exam, they did not look as panicked as the previous generation. He was also curious about what strategy Horikita would choose. Calmly, Horikita answered that her goal this time was not to destroy her opponents, but to find a way for them to win. She also admitted that she had already prepared a plan. After Ryuu-en left, they finally opened the door to Class 1D. However, to their surprise, the room was completely empty. There was not a single student inside. The next day, the school atmosphere became tense again. During break time, 2 first-year students suddenly appeared in the second-year area and immediately drew everyone's attention. They were Hosen and Nanase from Class 1D. Without wasting any time, Hosen immediately showed an arrogant and provocative attitude. He came with a challenging aura, and his behavior was truly rude. Of course, Sudo did not stay silent after seeing a junior act so disrespectfully. However, Hosen responded with insults instead. He mocked Sudo's low academic score, then said in a condescending tone that he had come to help the stupid students from Class 2D. Not only that, Hosen even claimed that the position of the first-year students was now far higher than that of the second-year students. And indeed, in this exam, the second-year students were in a very unfavorable position. If they lost, the punishment they received would be far heavier than the punishment for the first-year students. Hosen understood that very well. Because of that, he became even more arrogant and kept pressuring Class 2D. He insulted them non-stop, even pushing Sudo until he fell to the floor. After that, he mocked Sudo again for being too weak just because of a small push. Seeing that incident, Ishizaki, who had been watching from a distance, immediately shouted and approached them to defend Sudo. However, before the situation became even more chaotic, Nanase quickly stopped Hosen so the problem would not grow bigger. Even so, Hosen only apologized in a mocking tone, without showing even the slightest bit of guilt. Ishizaki almost lost his patience, but this time, Ryuu-en finally stepped in. Ryuu-en quickly understood Hosen's character. He knew that Hosen came from a harsh environment similar to his own, a world filled with strength and domination. However, when Hosen heard Ryuu-en's name, he was briefly surprised. He admitted that he had often heard that name in his hometown. At first, Hosen did not believe it. Someone with a reputation as big as Ryuu-en's turned out to have a body that did not look as strong as he had imagined. However, Ryuu-en calmly replied that his body was far more useful than the muscles of someone like Hosen. Apparently, Hosen had wanted to challenge Ryuu-en for a long time, but he had never gotten the chance. Because of that, as soon as they met face to face, he immediately invited Ryuu-en to fight. However, Ryuu-en flatly refused. He knew there was no benefit at all in dealing with someone like Hosen. Rather than wasting time, Ryuu-en immediately ordered his classmates to leave. Even so, Hosen refused to back down. He kept provoking them and clearly showed that he was not afraid of anyone. At that moment, Hosen approached Ibuki and suddenly lifted her with one hand while grabbing her by the neck. Seeing Ibuki being treated like that, Ryuu-en prepared to step in and protect her. However, before the clash truly happened, Nanase once again tried to stop Hosen. Unfortunately, Hosen still continued his actions. Meanwhile, Ayanokoji, who had only been observing from the start, began to feel that something was strange. Hosen clearly knew that there were security cameras around them. However, strangely, he still dared to act violently in public. What was even more suspicious was that when Nanase said an unexplained keyword, Hosen immediately stopped and backed away. After that, Hosen and Nanase finally left the area. However, it turned out that the commotion had been observed by another first-year student from the beginning. Hosen looked annoyed when he realized that student was there. However, the student only smiled calmly, without showing even the slightest fear. Not long after that, a man in a suit who seemed to be a teacher came to the location. He approached Hosen and immediately told everyone to disperse. Before leaving, Ayanokoji noticed one thing. Nanase stared at him for quite a while, as if she was curious about him. Eventually, the man in the suit introduced himself. His name was Shiba Katsunori, the homeroom teacher of Class 1D. Politely, he apologized for the commotion caused by his students. Meanwhile, the first-year student who had been watching the incident also introduced himself. His name was Yagami Takuya. After Yagami introduced himself, Kushida suddenly appeared. She did not know anything about the incident that had just happened, so she immediately asked what had actually happened there. Yagami then greeted Kushida warmly. It turned out that the two of them knew each other. Kushida remembered that there used to be a junior at her middle school who was known for being very smart, and it seemed that person was Yagami. However, strangely, Horikita did not recognize Yagami at all, even though they came from the same middle school. This made Ayanokoji even more curious. Did Yagami know something about Kushida's past? On top of that, from Kushida's expression, there seemed to be a slight sense of worry when she saw Yagami. Yagami himself was actually from Class 1B. Without hesitation, he immediately asked Kushida to become his partner in the upcoming exam. However, Kushida chose to delay her decision. She did not want to rush into choosing a partner. After that, Ayanokoji returned to his group. Miyake then shared important information. He said that this elite school had just accepted someone extremely dangerous. According to Miyake, Hosen was stronger than Ryuu-en, and even more dangerous than Sudo. He knew that because he had once lived in a harsh environment filled with delinquents. From there, Miyake had once heard a story that Hosen had beaten the strongest student at his previous school so badly that the student ended up in the hospital. Miyake himself had already left that environment and his past as a delinquent behind. However, the memory of Hosen was still clearly stored in his mind. After school, Horikita invited Ayanokoji to have a discussion. As usual, Sudo also joined them. Horikita did not mind, because she knew that if Sudo was left out, he might lose focus during the exam. They then began looking for first-year students who were willing to cooperate. Not long after that, they met 3 students from Class 1D, Kagami, Mikami, and Hakucho. Among the 3 of them, Hakucho was the smartest. He was willing to cooperate, but on one condition. He asked for a payment of 500,000 private points. According to Hakucho, that request was still very reasonable. After all, they would help save the low-ranked second-year students from being expelled from the school. Horikita tried to negotiate with another offer. If they were willing to cooperate without asking for points, Horikita would repay them using her abilities in the next exam. However, Hakucho still refused. According to him, working with higher-ranked classes like Class A or Class B would be far more beneficial. The reason was simple. Their abilities were much more reliable compared to Class D. Hearing that, Horikita changed her strategy. She began provoking Hakucho by pointing out that she was also from Class D. In other words, students from the upper classes might hesitate to exchange abilities with another student from Class D. However, Hakucho answered calmly. He revealed that several seniors had actually already offered to cooperate with him, including Hashimoto from Class 2A. Horikita then offered 500,000 points as a reward. However, this time, there was one additional condition. Hakucho had to gather all the students of Class 1D for a discussion. When they heard that request, Hakucho and his friends immediately fell silent. They said that they could not gather anyone without Hosen's permission. From this, Horikita gained important information. Hosen apparently had a very strong influence within Class 1D. The discussion between Horikita, Ayanokoji, and Sudo continued. From the information they had obtained, they began to understand that Hosen truly held full control over Class 1D. He had even set a price of 500,000 private points for anyone who wanted to cooperate with his classmates. The problem was that Class 2D had very limited private points. They could not possibly spend that many points on every first-year student. Because of that, Horikita realized that they had to find another way. In the middle of their conversation, a female student from Class 1A suddenly appeared. Her name was Amasawa Ichika. From the start, Ichika immediately showed interest in cooperating with Horikita. The reason was simple. Both of them had high academic abilities, so if they were paired together, they would most likely become a top-ranking team. However, when she found out that Horikita was actually looking for a partner for Sudo, Ichika became even more interested. Ichika said that she was used to working with men who were physically strong. She even admitted that she liked men who looked strong. Without hesitation, Ichika began teasing Sudo with rather bold movements. She gently touched Sudo's cheek and chest, as if she wanted to test his physical strength directly. Then, Ichika gave a condition. Sudo had to fight another strong second-year student. If Sudo won, then Ichika would agree to become his partner. Horikita immediately accepted that condition. However, Sudo refused because fighting was clearly forbidden at school. Even so, Horikita answered that the fight could be considered valid as long as both sides agreed to it. Of course, that was only a made-up excuse. Ayanokoji also supported her because he understood the strategy behind Horikita's words. In reality, there were almost no second-year students reckless enough to challenge Sudo directly. So, there was a high chance that Ichika would choose Sudo without needing an actual fight. However, Ichika was not that easy to convince. She admitted that Sudo was indeed the strongest fighter among the second-year students. Even so, according to her, physical strength alone was not enough. Ichika then changed her condition. This time, the partner she chose had to be able to cook. If that person could make a dish that satisfied her taste, then she would agree to become his exam partner. Sudo honestly admitted that he had never cooked in his entire life. However, Ichika still gave him a chance. She said that if the boy Horikita brought could make a delicious dish, then she would say yes. And of course, Horikita immediately pointed at Ayanokoji to do the cooking. Ayanokoji actually wanted to refuse. However, if he refused, Ichika would not become Sudo's partner. In the end, he was forced to admit that he was good at cooking. Ichika wanted the cooking test to be done that same day. However, Horikita quickly came up with an excuse. She said that Ayanokoji had many things to do today, so the test could not be done immediately. Ichika eventually gave them a deadline until tomorrow. If the cooking test was not done by then, she would no longer be willing to pair up with Sudo. What made the situation even more troublesome was that Ichika did not give Ayanokoji any time to practice at all. Because of that, Horikita began thinking of a new strategy so Ayanokoji could succeed in this sudden cooking mission. So, that was the recap of Part 1 from Volume 1 of the Classroom of the Elite Year 2 light novel. There may be a few differences and adjustments from the anime version because in this part, the story immediately focuses on the beginning of Ayanokoji's second-year life, the new threat from the White Room, the major changes in the school system, and the special exam that forces the seniors to work together with the first-year students. For now, it feels like there is nothing else that needs to be explained, because everything is already clear. So, just wait for the continuation in the next part.